The studio lights blazed down like a spotlight on history in the making. Millions were watching, millions more would replay it later, but in that instant, time felt suspended. Kash Patel leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his face, certain he had the upper hand. His voice dripped with condescension as he lobbed yet another dismissive jab, expecting silence, or surrender. But instead, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her eyes steady, her voice measured, her presence electric. And then came the line. A line so sharp, so precise, it sliced through the tension like a blade through glass. Patel froze. His smirk collapsed into silence. The audience gasped in unison, a ripple of shock rolling through the room. For a moment, you could almost hear the heartbeat of America itself stop. On social media, clips of the exchange would explode within minutes, hashtags firing across timelines, voices shouting, "Did you hear what she just said?" It wasn't just a comeback. It was a reclamation. It was every underestimated voice, every ignored truth, every moment when dignity refused to bow to arrogance. And Crockett embodied it all in a single sentence. The cameras caught Patel blinking, fumbling for a response, but there was nothing. The arrogance that had carried him into the debate evaporated, leaving him stranded, exposed. The crowd's reaction was more than entertainment, it was validation. Viewers at home felt it in their bones. This wasn't just Crockett's win, it was their win too. And yet, the power of that moment didn't come from thin air. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't scripted. It was years of fire, years of grit, years of learning exactly when to stay silent and exactly when to strike. This was more than a mic drop. It was a turning point. The kind of moment that ricochets across headlines, reshapes reputations, and makes history replay itself again and again on our screens. But how did it come to this explosive moment? And why did it leave millions talking? To understand the power of this mic drop, we need to rewind. The debate was billed as just another clash in the endless grind of partisan theater, but for those in the room, there was a hum in the air that felt different. The cameras swept across the stage as the moderator introduced the guests. Kash Patel stepped forward first, shoulders back, grin wide, his body language radiating smug certainty. He adjusted his suit jacket with the kind of practiced swagger that said, "I've done this before, I know how to dominate a stage." To his supporters, Patel was a warrior, a man who relished confrontation, who thrived on steamrolling opponents with rapid-fire accusations and well-rehearsed talking points. Tonight, he expected the same playbook to work flawlessly. His smirk was practically daring anyone to challenge him. And then came Jasmine Crockett. No swagger. No theatrics. She walked onto the stage with a quiet composure, the calm of someone who doesn't need to announce her power. The contrast was immediate, almost cinematic, Patel's performance-driven bravado versus Crockett's steady, unshakable presence. To pundits, she seemed like the underdog. To casual viewers, she looked like the one who would play defense. And Patel was counting on it. The opening minutes followed a predictable rhythm. Patel launched into sweeping generalizations, accusing, deflecting, painting himself as the insider who had all the answers. The audience chuckled at his rehearsed one-liners, the kind crafted to score points on social media. Crockett listened. She didn't flinch. She didn't scramble for airtime. Instead, she waited, studied, allowed Patel to bask in the echo of his own voice. It was strategy. But Patel couldn't see it. He mistook silence for weakness, patience for hesitation. And that miscalculation would become his undoing. Because the stakes weren't just about who looked sharper under the lights. They weren't just about winning a soundbite war. No, this was about something far deeper. This was about what kind of voices get heard in America, and what kind of values get trampled in the noise. Democracy. Accountability. Dignity. Crockett represented a test of whether calm truth could still stand its ground against the chaos of arrogance. Every viewer watching at home could feel the weight of that subtext, even if they didn't say it out loud. It wasn't just Patel versus Crockett. It was swagger versus substance, arrogance versus resolve, bluster versus dignity. Patel, still convinced of his dominance, leaned harder into his attacks. He smirked as he interrupted, spun narratives with the arrogance of someone sure he could not be touched. But with each passing minute, Crockett's silence became louder, heavier, charged with anticipation. The audience didn't know it yet, but the stage was being set for a takedown that would reverberate far beyond that night. Because Patel had no idea what was about to hit him. But Patel's arrogance was about to collide with a force he didn't see coming. Kash Patel didn't arrive at this debate as an unknown. His name was already synonymous with controversy, his career built on a string of headline-grabbing moments where swagger outpaced substance. For years, Patel had fashioned himself as a partisan warrior, a man willing to go to extremes to defend his chosen side, no matter the cost to credibility or civility. To his admirers, he was bold. To his critics, he was reckless. But to those watching that night, his history mattered because it told the story of a man who always mistook volume for power, and arrogance for authority. Long before he was trading barbs on live television, Patel made his mark in Washington by stepping into roles that prized loyalty over independence. Time and again, he positioned himself as the attack dog, always ready to throw a punch, always eager to play the role of partisan soldier. He spoke with certainty even when facts were slippery, and when called out, he doubled down rather than admit error. That became his brand, never wrong, never humble, never still. There were countless moments that defined his reputation. He would dismiss complex issues with a smirk and a soundbite, reducing nuance to caricature. When pressed on inconsistencies, he often leaned into deflection, twisting the narrative until it no longer resembled reality. Supporters cheered these tactics, they saw them as clever, as fearless. But to millions of others, they reeked of arrogance, the kind of arrogance that corrodes trust in institutions and mocks the very idea of accountability. And contradictions followed him everywhere. He portrayed himself as a defender of integrity while routinely embracing tactics that shredded it. He spoke about truth as though he owned it, but rarely paused long enough to listen to perspectives that challenged his own. In every public appearance, there was that same smug tilt of the head, that half-smile suggesting he was the smartest man in the room, whether or not the evidence backed him up. For audiences weary of political theater, Patel embodied the very cynicism they despised, a figure who thrived on conflict, who wielded arrogance like a sword, who treated every debate not as an exchange of ideas but as a stage for his performance. Watching him, you could almost feel the calculation, every word designed for provocation, every gesture crafted to dominate rather than engage. That is what made him so infuriating. He was not just arrogant, he was dismissive. Dismissive of his opponents, dismissive of uncomfortable truths, dismissive of the idea that humility has a place in leadership. It was this posture, the refusal to acknowledge limits, the addiction to his own narrative, that created the perfect storm. Because arrogance, when unchecked, doesn't just alienate opponents. It blinds the person wielding it. Patel entered that debate stage so certain of his dominance that he never considered the possibility of defeat. He thought he was facing a soft target, a rising lawmaker too inexperienced to challenge him. He believed his track record of bulldozing opponents would repeat itself, as if history owed him another easy win. But what Patel couldn't see, what millions watching would soon witness, was that arrogance is its own trap. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every attempt to belittle his opponent was fuel, setting the stage for a dramatic reversal he could never anticipate. The contradictions that once seemed to shield him would soon expose him. The performance he thought made him invincible would, in the hands of Jasmine Crockett, make him vulnerable. And so, as Patel's backstory loomed in the background, his overconfidence only grew in the present. The debate lights glared, the cameras rolled, and he played his part as he always had, the smirking provocateur, the man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. The villain role was not forced upon him. He had written it himself, one arrogant moment at a time. Yet every villain's rise sets the stage for their downfall. And this stage belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Before the lights of Congress ever illuminated her name, Jasmine Crockett's story was already one of grit, resilience, and a refusal to be silenced. She was not born into privilege or wealth, she carved her path step by step, challenge by challenge, until her voice carried not only her own convictions but the dignity of those too often ignored. To understand why her comeback against Patel landed with such force, you must understand the road that shaped her. Crockett grew up with a fire that came from watching her community fight battles that were never fair. She saw firsthand how justice often bent away from the people who needed it most. Those memories imprinted on her, the struggles of neighbors, the quiet sacrifices of families working double shifts, the resilience of communities that refused to bow under pressure. These weren't just stories around her, they became the foundation of her purpose. When she chose the law, it wasn't for prestige. It was because she wanted to stand between the powerful and the powerless, because she had witnessed too many lives derailed by arrogance and exploitation. In courtrooms, she quickly became known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue, someone who could slice through contradictions without ever raising her voice. She didn't just represent clients, she represented the principle that dignity mattered, that truth mattered, that even in the face of towering institutions, the underdog deserved a champion. That same spirit carried her into politics. For many, the transition from law to legislation was daunting. But Crockett treated Congress not as a prize, but as a battlefield, another arena where the fight for dignity had to be waged. She wasn't naive about the odds. She knew the halls of power could be cold, dismissive places. She knew her voice might be underestimated, her presence challenged. And yet, she pressed forward, not because the fight was easy, but because walking away was never an option. And if Patel was counting on rattling her, he hadn't studied her history. Crockett had already faced worse than smug smiles on a stage. She had faced systemic barriers, the long grind of proving herself in spaces where few thought she belonged. She had endured skepticism, doubt, and attacks more vicious than anything Patel could muster. Each time, she responded the same way, with composure, with intelligence, with an unshakable sense of self. That resilience was not just strategy. It was identity. Crockett embodied the very qualities her audience longed to see reflected back at them: the immigrant's determination, the worker's resilience, the woman's defiance against a system that so often tried to diminish her. Her strength was not just her own, it was shared, collective, an inheritance of all who had been told they were less and chose to fight anyway. And her intelligence was never showy. Crockett's power lay in listening, in calculating, in knowing when to let someone expose their own weakness before she moved in with precision. Where Patel rushed to fill silence with noise, she wielded silence as a weapon, letting it unsettle her opponents, forcing them into mistakes. That discipline, honed over years of struggle, became her signature. It was this history, the humble beginnings, the courtroom battles, the congressional fights, that gave Crockett her armor. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't performance. It was lived truth, sharpened by hardship, strengthened by victories hard-earned. When she stepped onto that debate stage, she carried all of it with her: the weight of her journey, the expectations of her supporters, the voice of communities that had been told to wait their turn. And Patel? Patel thought he was facing just another politician. He thought his interruptions, his dismissive smirks, would throw her off balance. But Crockett had been underestimated before. She had been dismissed before. And every time, she had turned dismissal into triumph. She had faced bigger battles than this smug partisan warrior. But nothing, would prepare Patel for what was coming next. The clash was inevitable, and the first sparks flew when Patel tried to corner her on live TV. The debate had barely warmed up before Patel launched his offensive. He leaned forward in his chair, cutting off the moderator, speaking over Crockett with the certainty of a man who believed dominance came from sheer volume. His words were rapid, almost machine gun fire, each sentence crafted not for substance but for humiliation. He smirked as he spoke, rolling his eyes as though Crockett's presence on stage was an inconvenience, not a challenge. Every time Crockett began a point, Patel interrupted. He waved his hand dismissively, chuckled under his breath, and lobbed snide remarks meant to draw laughter from his supporters. "That's cute," he said at one point, tilting his head in mock amusement, as if her reasoned arguments were nothing more than a child's protest. The arrogance was suffocating, his smirk growing with every line he thought landed. But Crockett did not rise to the bait. She didn't flinch. She didn't match his volume or mimic his theatrics. Instead, she sat steady, letting Patel's words pile higher and higher, letting the weight of his arrogance become impossible to ignore. Her composure was disarming, an almost eerie calmness in the face of a storm designed to rattle her. The studio audience began to shift uncomfortably. At first, there had been scattered chuckles at Patel's mocking tone, but as his interruptions mounted, those chuckles faded into silence. Viewers could feel it, the imbalance, the unfairness of the exchange. Patel thought he was winning, but his overreach was exposing him. He was talking too much, too loudly, too arrogantly. And beside him, Crockett's quiet strength only grew more visible. The moderator tried to intervene, reminding Patel to allow his opponent to finish, but he brushed it off with a shrug and another sarcastic jab. "She can try to explain herself," he sneered, "but the facts are against her." His voice carried the confidence of someone convinced the audience was on his side. Yet the room was no longer with him. The sighs, the whispers, the restless movements in the crowd told a different story. Patience was wearing thin. And still, Crockett waited. She let him burn through his arsenal of smugness, each interruption digging his own hole deeper. It was strategy, pure and simple, allowing arrogance to implode under its own weight. Her eyes never wavered, her posture never slumped. She was calm, deliberate, almost surgical in her restraint. Then, the silence came. Patel had fired off another dismissive line, one too many, and for the first time, he leaned back, certain he had landed a decisive blow. The room grew still, the cameras fixed, millions at home leaning closer to their screens. That was when Crockett moved. She leaned in, her voice steady but charged with something deeper than anger, something sharper, more enduring. The tension in the room was electric, every eye locked on her, waiting. Then, with millions watching, Crockett leaned in. And in that moment, history slowed down, before she delivered the line heard across America. The studio was silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, that makes every breath audible, every shifting chair sound like thunder. Patel had just leaned back, his smirk wide, certain he had cornered her, certain he had cemented his dominance. But silence is deceptive. Because in that stillness, Jasmine Crockett chose her moment. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on him, not with anger, not with flustered desperation, but with the calm of someone who knows the weight of truth is on her side. Her voice was low, deliberate, almost soft compared to Patel's bombast. And then she delivered it. The comeback. The line that would shatter his smug armor in a single strike. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't embellished. It was precise, sharp, undeniable. Like a scalpel, it cut through the noise and struck the very heart of his arrogance. Patel blinked. Once. Twice. The smirk faltered, his mouth half open as though his body expected words to follow, but none came. The cameras zoomed in instinctively, capturing every flicker of his unraveling confidence. For the first time that night, his rehearsed composure was gone. He was stunned, visibly rattled, caught without a script. The audience gasped. A collective intake of breath echoed through the studio, followed by murmurs, then bursts of applause that the moderators couldn't contain. On social media, the moment was already exploding. Clips were clipped, captions typed, "She ended him. This is the moment." Hashtags flooded in real time, hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag dignity wins, hashtag Patel frozen. And Crockett? She didn't flinch. She didn't bask. She didn't gloat. She simply sat back, steady as stone, as if what she had just said was not a performance, but a truth so self-evident it required no explanation. That restraint made it all the more powerful. She didn't need theatrics. The line spoke for itself. The dignity spoke for itself. Patel tried to recover. He cleared his throat, shuffled his notes, forced a chuckle that sounded more like a plea than a punchline. "Well," he stammered, "I think what she's trying to say is," but the crowd wasn't with him anymore. Every word he fumbled through only highlighted the devastation of Crockett's strike. He had been silenced not by volume, but by clarity. Not by rage, but by composure. Commentators on the sidelines exchanged looks, shaking their heads in disbelief. One whispered into a hot mic, "That was a knockout." Another scribbled notes furiously, already drafting the headline that would dominate morning news: "Crockett stuns Patel with savage comeback." The pacing of the moment stretched in the minds of viewers. Replay after replay circulated online. Someone added slow motion, zooming in on Patel's expression as the words hit him. Others looped the audience's gasp, turning it into a soundtrack of validation. The narrative was no longer his. It belonged to her, to the millions who had longed to see arrogance humbled. For progressives, for immigrants, for anyone who had ever been dismissed or underestimated, Crockett's calm takedown was more than political theater, it was personal. It was vindication. A reminder that dignity, wielded with precision, could topple arrogance in an instant. Viewers tweeted things like, "I felt that in my soul. She said what we've been waiting to hear. This is why we fight." Back on stage, Patel shifted uncomfortably. His body language betrayed him, the tapping foot, the nervous glance at the moderator, the hands fidgeting with papers he wasn't reading. His earlier swagger was gone. The smirk replaced with a clenched jaw, the confidence replaced with a thin sheen of panic. He looked like a man who had just been reminded that arrogance is fragile, that bluster collapses when confronted with truth. And Crockett? Still unshaken. She met his fumbling with the same calm composure she had carried from the start, embodying a dignity that could not be touched. She had said what needed to be said, and the resonance of it filled the space louder than any raised voice could. The studio crowd erupted into applause again, this time louder, more sustained. It was no longer just a debate, it was a reckoning. Patel had walked in expecting to dominate, but he left that moment diminished, his performance undone by the very qualities he had dismissed as weakness. In that instant, Crockett wasn't just a politician scoring a debate point. She was a symbol. A reminder of why dignity matters. A mirror held up to arrogance, showing it for what it truly was: fragile, shallow, destined to crumble. The comeback would be replayed for days, weeks, maybe years. Commentators would analyze it, fans would share it, critics would begrudgingly acknowledge it. But for those who saw it live, the memory of Patel's frozen face and Crockett's unshakable calm was already etched into history. But the clash didn't end there, the ripple effects were only just beginning. The moment Crockett's words hit Patel like a lightning strike, the internet caught fire. Within minutes, clips from the debate were clipped, captioned, and shared at a speed only social media can summon. Twitter feeds lit up as hashtags like #CrockettClapback, #FearlessTruthTeller, and #PatelFrozen rocketed to the top of trending lists. On TikTok, users replayed her line again and again, layering dramatic music, slow-motion edits, and side-by-side reaction videos of stunned faces. The savage comeback wasn't just a political moment, it was a cultural event. Memes poured in. Patel's deer-in-headlights reaction was plastered onto movie posters, sports highlight reels, even gifs of collapsing buildings. One meme showed his frozen face next to the caption, "When you thought you were the smartest in the room," another had Crockett calmly sipping water with the words, "Dignity never sweats." The internet did what it always does with viral moments, but this time, it wasn't just jokes. It was validation. Celebrities chimed in almost instantly. Actors, musicians, and influencers tweeted their praise, calling Crockett's performance the reminder we needed that composure is strength. A late-night comedian devoted an entire segment to the exchange, playing the clip to a roaring studio audience before quipping, "That wasn't a comeback, that was a demolition." News outlets scrambled to cover the fallout. Headlines splashed across homepages: "Crockett's calm takedown dominates debate night, Patel stunned into silence, viral clip sparks national conversation. Panelists debated not just the policy points but the sheer force of the moment, many admitting that Crockett's poise under fire had set a new standard for debate performance. And through it all, ordinary viewers joined the chorus. Comments poured into feeds and forums, echoing the same sentiment again and again. Finally, someone said it. She spoke for us. This is what leadership looks like. For progressives, for immigrants, for anyone who had ever been dismissed with arrogance, Crockett's moment became personal. Her voice was their voice, her calm their vindication. Patel, meanwhile, became the butt of the joke. His earlier swagger turned into endless ridicule, his flustered reaction looped side by side with cartoon pratfalls and comedy skits. Supporters tried to spin the moment, but the damage was done. He had been exposed not by shouting, but by silence shattered with precision. Influencers capitalized on the momentum. Motivational speakers used Crockett's line as the opening to reels about confidence. Educators dissected the body language, showing how composure can dismantle arrogance. Even corporate accounts jumped in, slyly referencing the viral moment to boost engagement. The clip had transcended politics, it was now part of the cultural bloodstream. And that resonance mattered. Viewers didn't just laugh, they felt something deeper. They felt pride, validation, even hope. In a political climate where arrogance too often goes unchecked, Crockett's composure was a reminder that calm dignity could still win. It was a story they could tell their friends, a clip they could send to family members, a meme they could share with a caption that said, "This is why I believe." It wasn't just Crockett defeating Patel. It was dignity defeating arrogance. And millions of viewers, scrolling through hashtags and watching replays, felt like they were part of that victory. But beyond the memes, something deeper was happening, a reminder of why these moments matter. When the noise of the crowd softened and the headlines began to fade into analysis, what lingered wasn't just the clip or the memes, it was the meaning. Because Jasmine Crockett had done more than silence Kash Patel, she had reframed the very idea of what strength looks like in American life. In a world where arrogance often struts across stages unchecked, she reminded us that dignity is the greater power. Arrogance shouts, but dignity speaks. Arrogance mocks, but dignity stands. And in that moment, her composure under fire was proof that courage does not need theatrics, it needs clarity. The confrontation was about more than two individuals trading words. It was about the values at stake. Patel's performance was a performance of selfishness, of bluster designed to elevate himself above the truth. Crockett's response was the opposite, service over selfishness, substance over swagger. She didn't fight for applause, she fought for respect, for justice, for the principle that the truth deserves a defender. That is why her line resonated far beyond the debate stage. Because everyone watching could see themselves in it. Immigrants who had been told their voices didn't matter. Workers who had been interrupted and dismissed by bosses. Students who had been mocked for daring to speak up. Crockett wasn't just Jasmine Crockett in that moment, she was a mirror, reflecting the quiet strength in all who had been underestimated and refused to crumble. And this is the moral clarity the country craves. Not more shouting. Not more smugness dressed as strength. But leaders who understand that service requires humility, that public life demands accountability, and that arrogance, no matter how polished, will eventually collapse under the weight of truth. Her dignity became a lesson, that silence, when rooted in strength, is not weakness, it is strategy. That calm in the face of arrogance is not passivity, it is power. And that truth, even when drowned out by noise, still cuts through, sharper than any insult. For her audience, for those who replayed the clip with pride swelling in their chest, this was more than entertainment. It was a reminder that justice still breathes, that dignity still matters, that arrogance can be toppled without raising a voice. It was a message meant to inspire, not just to watch, but to act, to share, to carry the values she embodied into daily life. Because Crockett's victory wasn't just political. It was human. It was universal. It told every viewer, you, too, can face arrogance with composure. You, too, can let dignity be your weapon. You, too, can choose truth over bluster. And that's why this moment wasn't just about Crockett versus Patel, it was about all of us. Jasmine Crockett stunned Kash Patel on live TV with a comeback so sharp, so undeniable, that the audience was left in shock, and the nation was left talking. It wasn't just a debate moment. It was a revelation. A reminder that dignity can disarm arrogance, that truth can silence bluster, that composure under fire can win the night. The title of this story is no exaggeration. Crockett didn't just win an exchange, she crystallized a truth that millions needed to hear. Patel's smugness, his dismissive arrogance, all of it collapsed in the face of calm precision. And in that collapse, Crockett became more than a congresswoman sparring in a debate. She became a symbol of what we all crave: courage grounded in service, dignity rising above selfishness, truth outlasting lies. That's why this clip has traveled across screens, across conversations, across communities. Because we recognize ourselves in it. We see the battles we fight every day, against arrogance, against dismissal, against being silenced. And we see in Crockett's victory a validation of our own strength. So here is the call: if you believe dignity will always outshine arrogance, share this story. Join us, because voices like Crockett's deserve to be heard, amplified, and remembered. Don't let this moment fade as just another viral clip. Let it be a spark. Subscribe, share, comment. Add your voice to the chorus that says arrogance does not win, and never will. Together, we can keep pushing for leaders who embody clarity over chaos, service over self, dignity over dismissal. Because in the end, this wasn't just about Crockett stunning Patel. It was about proving, once again, that truth still has power. And that power belongs to all of us.